This topic is a bit different from a lot of the other topics that I've spoken to because it speaks more to a relationship between a business and an individual than any specific best practice around cybersecurity. But it does directly link back to a cybersecurity posture as well. But this is a scary topic because there's a lot of points in here that may not have an easy answer. And the end game here is not necessarily to win. It's just to understand better how to help protect organizations from cybersecurity risk and also even from fraud. And the first thing I'm going to do is help you understand my perspective on things, because when you look at this image, most people would either see something that is half full or something that's half empty. As a cybersecurity professional, we look at things a bit differently. We're always looking for potential ulterior motives or other reasons why things are the way they are. And because of that, we can ultimately be quite paranoid about things. But at the same time, it does help us get a better grasp on the business angle and the business aspect of the cybersecurity perspective. And that is very, very important to this topic. So let's take a step back and reset a little bit and get ourselves feeling good. And we'll get right into the topic of digital trust. So, what exactly is digital trust? Well, digital trust is the same as human trust. It's the concept that you've got a relationship and a personal connection with somebody that you like doing business with, or the feeling that somebody has your back, and the concept that all the parties involved in a trust relationship will benefit somehow from that relationship, potentially quite directly. And taking all of that and making it exist in a digital realm or a digital world. And the way we're going to start there is by looking at what matters most in an organization. And when you talk about it, especially if you're thinking about it from a cybersecurity perspective, there's lots of different things that people will say. People say, oh, regulatory and risk, or advanced threat protection, or applying cognitive analytics and orchestration, or fraud, or cloud, or collaboration. But the reality of it is what matters most is individuals, because it's those individuals that choose to do business with you, or it's the individuals that work at an organization that direct that organization to do business with you. And you can also see evidence of this by even looking at board priorities, because most boards will say the same thing. The focuses are either retaining or attracting new business from people, keeping people happy, profitability, or shareholder happiness and shareholder access. All of these things are very personally directed. So if we look at the relationships that are being built between entities and organizations, and we'll look at it in the financial context, that's the clients and the banks. But the clients and the banks can't do any business without also using data. And data is massive. It's a gigantic topic with lots of categories and subcategories. Now, from a security standpoint, you might look at this and say, well, a lot of this stuff isn't relevant to a security posture. And I'm going to prove to you in a few seconds why it is. Because all of this data is important to both the bank and the prospective client of that bank. And it's this data plus the client and the bank that equals the transactions, and it's the transactions that drive business forward. It's what creates profitability and shareholder pleasure and employee satisfaction and the ability to attract and retain customers. All of this is about the transactions. And since all of the transactions are based on all of those different data factors, inherently it's all about cybersecurity, because it's ultimately a cybersecurity professional's job to try and protect transactions. So if we're omitting key data from the transaction chain from your cybersecurity posture, you're probably missing something. And this is where things get a little bit scary. But this is why we introduced the concept of digital trust, because digital trust in banking is the ability for the orchestration of all these dissimilar risk management processes to come into a single motion that provides direct benefit to all parties, the financial institutions and the clients trying to do business with them. So instead of trying to tackle all of these different concepts in silos, if you look at digital trust as a single motion, it's a little bit easier to get your head around. It may not be incredibly easy to address, but at least there's a concept that everybody can stand behind and focus on. And the reason why it's so important to organize into this concept is going back to this data model. If you just worry about organizing and managing data for the sake of the data, you can end up with a lot of very, very good looking dashboards that seem to be very relevant and very executive focused, but it could also mean absolutely nothing. And I happen to love these spurious correlation data from Tyler Vegan. If you've never seen it, I strongly encourage you to go check it out. But the idea here is very, very important. There's a lot of very meaningful data, but you can organize it in a way that is completely meaningless. Maybe entertaining, I'll grant you that, but still ultimately meaningless. So you can't organize data for the sake of data. And this is where the problem comes in if you try and simply use security operations tools that are derived largely from generic IT operations, analytics, and data gathering systems. You really need the right tool for the job so that you don't end up with these kinds of dashboards. You need to be exactly on point, and the reason why is because what you're trying to protect is whatever is in this envelope. And what's in this envelope is different for every business and for every client trying to do business with a financial services organization. And that's why the transaction chain is so important. But the transaction chain is determined by the data, and most of that data is largely not being looked at by cybersecurity teams or sometimes even IT operations teams. So if we look at another example of this, I'm speaking to you right now and you're listening because you trust that I have something interesting or compelling to talk about. You are then probably going to hear something that's interesting and talk to other people. And those other people are out there and ultimately they are your clients. And those clients are going to try and appeal to their consumers, their end users. And that's really what this is all about. So, how do we get our clients, our partners, to work with their clients to attract more consumers and retain more consumers to make all the boards happy? There's two things that have to get done. You have to have the right capabilities with the right reputation. And from a capability standpoint, it's really about access, speed, and innovation. How rapidly can people provide access to their constituents and their client base for the services that are being offered? How fast can it be done, and how much friction is in the middle? If you have to scan 3 fingers, your eyeball, your nose print, the thumb of your child, and answer questions about your great grandfather's maternal cousin, um, yes, it may be incredibly secure, but nobody's going to want to do business with you. So the balance of access and speed comes with innovation because it's newer technologies and capabilities that open the door to allow people to do more business more securely and quickly. But the second piece of this is reputation, and not just the reputation of the brand itself that this potential consumer wants to do business with. What does that consumer's friends and family and best friends and college roommates, what does everybody think of this brand that this consumer wants to do business with? It all matters. But it's also important to understand the reputation of the consumer, the personal reputation, because just as consumers will decide or not to decide to do business with an organization, that organization can also decide not to do business with a consumer. It is all interrelated. But when you package the capabilities and the reputation together, you get the offer that people can bring to market. And you, as vendors and partners, when you talk to your client base about this, creating this offer is critically important because what you bring to this offer is your own insight and experience, the objectivity of knowing what's out there and making sure that you create the right capability sets to put into the offer. And then finally, the ability to do storytelling, which is often a lost art. It's the fact that you can help your client base put together a story and a cohesive vision and an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, not only so that it can be easily adopted within that organization, but then that organization can communicate it to the consumers so that people want to do business with them. So the advantages that they get out of this relationship is greater relationships between B2C and B2B. Of course, the ability to create and preserve these digital trust relationships, but also you'll ultimately start meeting these board objectives. Because if you can do all of this together, you're going to be in much better shape. The problem here is that every time you create innovation and frictionless transaction chains, you increase the overall complexity on the back end. Now, complexity fits in two ways. Complexity is not just the complexity of tools and systems that have to come together to bring these offers to market. Complexity is also how you protect it, because the other thing that's happening here is that social media has largely created a pretty significant problem for people. The problem is everybody likes to overshare. And so if a new client of a financial organization decides to overshare about the credit cards they've gotten or the accounts that they've opened or this great investment account they've got or how much money they made, it creates an open door for the bad guys. And those bad guys have the ability now to break into the financial organizations, even if those financial organizations are relatively well protected, because the consumers are now insiders giving the bad guys direct access to your environment. And that's also why it's important to look at the transaction chains and focus on digital trust and not just protecting the environment as an absolute value. So where do you start with that? You probably say, okay, I kind of understand what you're saying now, but where do you even begin? Well, you begin with the offer, because if you can protect the offer, you can protect the business. Now, this requires potentially a fairly significant change in philosophy, because most times when we talk about cybersecurity, it's in the context of infrastructure protections. But what we're actually saying here is you need to look at cybersecurity architecture on an offer by offer basis. Now, ultimately, there will be overlap, and that overlap is good because then you can extend and expand the range of the protection to cover multiple offers. But at least at first, you have to focus on the offers themselves. And the way you protect it in the financial sector is things like fraud protections, anti money laundering, and KYC, the ability to implement blockchain ledgers for tracking of all of the transactions as they go in and out of your organization, and even things like video analytics and link analysis, so that you can make connections between people that come to your brick and mortar establishments and work in your offices and how they do business and how they interact with people in and around their teams, their groups, and your customer bases. And then finally, doing things like SOC modeling and going over essential practices for cybersecurity and doing war games. All of these things are essential, but they all need to be in the context of the offers that are being launched, not not the business as a whole, because when you protect those offers, you protect the business. So it's very critical with all these different moving pieces to become well organized. And I'll give you a quick example. Let's say you see something weird in your environment from a security perspective around an offer or a transaction. You have to be able to know what's going on at the endpoint with the user that's on the endpoint, with the applications that the user is accessing. You have to be able to monitor access to people and say, you know what, even if you've got the right credentials accessing an application, something is off here, and so you can come in, but you can't do what we would normally allow you to do. You then have to be able to look at what's happening at a system level and figure out, is this normal? Is there a problem here? Should this be whitelisted or blacklisted? And then they take all of that different data sets and put it together in such a way that organizes your thoughts and all of the different indicators and activity, so that as you combine the data sets, you can do it in a way that helps you better understand what is actually going on and why. It's only when you reach this point of data visualization that you can start to look authoritatively at the people and how they conduct business and the transactions that are going on. This is how you protect the digital trust models. And once you have all this data, you also have to be able to organize it into a cohesive incident response plan. Because unfortunately, the reality is it's not a matter of if, but when something happens. And when it does happen, you need to have a platform that can account for all of the current data, not run books and playbooks and action plans that were written 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 1 or 2 years ago, or based on regulations that were written and out of date already. You have to have something that can build it in real time. And then finally, to find the why, you have to have a platform that can create associations between people, because digital trust is about people. So you have to look at those people and figure out, for example, out of all these people that have worked in an office, who doesn't work here anymore? What types of emails have they been sending? How is all this different activity related to offenses? Are these offenses somehow connected to different people and potentially customers and clients of an organization? And then finally be able to figure out, okay, based on all of this different data sets, how can I understand what all these people have in common? Is it potentially by a common person that they know, or an address that they've been working at, or a location they're at right at this very moment, as they seem to be doing these things that seem to be suspicious or potentially malicious, and be able to pinpoint down to even a city block exactly what's going on and why and when, so that you can not only uncover motivation, but you can help get a better understanding of how people are acting and reacting to situations. Now, I know this all seems very kind of intimidating and scary and maybe even Big Brotherish, so let me bring you back down to earth here a little bit and reset. But it is ultimately about this. If you can protect the offers, you can protect the business. And that's what this is about. This is not about oversharing. This is not about creating too much of a security posture that won't really work well. This is about protecting the offers. And you have to do everything in your power to protect those offers. Because if clients believe that the offers are protected and the offers drive the transactions and the transactions are driven by the data, the bank, and the client, you have a secure chain. Now, nothing is ever completely foolproof. And like I said, you know you're not going to be able to prevent everything from happening. But when you have all these different tools and safeguards and workflows in place and all these different elements aligned, what it means is that when something happens, you're in a much better position to protect the clients of the financial institution from harm. So how do we begin on this journey? Well, there's really three concepts, three pillars that need to be adopted. First is unification. The whole business has to be organized in such a way that all the business units can operate, report on, and manage transaction risk in a single motion. That goes back to digital trust. But you then have to have a level of orchestration so that when something is detected, there is a process that is followed. And whether you fully automate or partially automate that process, that is absolutely critical. And then the third piece is innovation. The focus really needs to be on the concept of how do we innovate our security posture and align the security posture innovation to the product and service innovation, instead of just, can we check boxes? Can we meet the regulatory requirements? So the calls to action here are simple. First of all, you have to check your measures. You have to make sure that all of your leadership and executive KPIs are structured for digital trust and not just address corporate performance and audit. You need to not be afraid to break some glass and break some walls. So, how well are your cross BU communications and collaboration channels functioning? Are there connections that you can make that aren't being made right now? And then finally, think to the future, and this goes back to innovation. How much of your budget is allocated to advanced maturity capabilities, stuff that goes straight into the strategic concepts and more innovation concepts, versus just simply day-to-day operations and checking regulatory boxes? So these are all the things that we want you to think about. These are the things we want you to take back to your organizations and your client base and ask them these critical questions, because this is never what you want to see. The goal of every tic-tac-toe game is to stalemate. So if you lose, it means that you fell asleep at the board, because as long as you're paying attention, you can consistently stalemate your opponent. So this is the one thing we never want our clients to have to look at, is a tic-tac-toe loss. So the objective here is to implement a structure around digital trust based on offers that protect transactions that will keep stalemating your opponents. And that's the end game. It's not a win. It's to live to fight another day without your brand ending up in the papers. Thank you.